Okay, so we're diving deep today
Yeah.
into what can really damage relationships.
Right.
And it looks like, from the sources you've brought,
Yeah.
that we're going to be focusing mostly on this list of 12 behaviors.
Right.
I think from, it's called the Relationship Blueprint.
Yes. The relationship blueprint. It's all about helping people build healthy relationships. And they lay out these 12 behaviors, not as just sort of, little things that bug you, but as like serious problems that can really hurt relationships in the long run.
So like warning signs almost,
Definitely.
red flags.
Yeah, like patterns that, if you're not careful, can really undermine the whole thing.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's jump in then. Let's go through them.
All right. Sounds good.
So the first one on the list is criticism, which, I mean, that's a tough one, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because, I mean, where's the line between, like, giving someone helpful feedback and just being critical?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about how you approach it. So, take a classic example, right? Your partner never takes out the trash.
Right.
Classic.
So you could just criticize them like, you're so lazy, you never remember to do anything. But that's just an attack.
Right.
You're attacking their character.
Nobody likes that.
No. But you could also say something like, hey, when the trash piles up, I start to feel a little overwhelmed. Would you mind taking it out?
That's much better, yeah.
It's the same message, but delivered in a way that's more about your feelings and the specific behavior.
And it's not accusatory.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's criticism. And I think that kind of leads into the next one, contempt. Right?
Yes. And this is where things get even more destructive, I think.
So how is contempt different than criticism?
It's like criticism on steroids almost.
Oh, okay.
It's not just disagreeing with someone. It's about really putting them down. Like you're communicating disgust,
Ooh.
disrespect, think sarcasm, eye-rolling, mockery.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Like you're having an argument and one person's like, oh, are you going to cry now?
It's awful.
Right. It's just like mean.
Yeah.
And it creates this toxic environment.
You can almost feel like the relationship like deteriorating in that moment.
Exactly. And that kind of negativity just builds and builds. And then, of course, you know what comes next.
Right.
Defensiveness.
Right.
Which, I mean, it's a natural reaction. If someone's attacking you, you want to defend yourself.
Sure.
But the problem is when you get defensive, you shut down communication. You're not really listening anymore.
So instead of like hearing what the other person is saying, you're just like trying to protect yourself.
Exactly. You're deflecting, making excuses, blaming them back. And that just escalates the conflict.
Yeah, it's like the best defense is a good offense.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really work in relationships.
No, it backfires big time.
Okay, so we've got criticism, contempt, defensiveness. What's next on this list of relationship wreckers?
Well, sometimes, after all that, you just hit a wall. You get stonewalling.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Like when someone just completely shuts down.
Yeah. You try to talk to them and it's like talking to a brick wall.
Right, exactly. Like they're physically there, but they've mentally checked out.
Yeah. It's like their fight or flight response kicks in, but instead of fighting, they just flee.
And that's got to be so frustrating for the other person.
It is. It feels like abandonment. Like they don't care enough to even engage.
It's almost worse than arguing, isn't it?
Sometimes, yeah.
Because at least then you're like, working things out or trying to.
You're still connected in a way.
But then, okay, what about avoidance of conflict? Isn't it sometimes better to just like let things go? I mean, you can't fight about every little thing.
Right. Picking your battles is important. But if you're constantly avoiding conflict, it's like sweeping dirt under the rug.
I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, it might seem easier in the moment. But all that unaddressed resentment, all that stuff you're not talking about, it just festers. And eventually it explodes.
Oh, okay. Like a pressure cooker.
Exactly. And the explosion is usually way bigger than the original issue.
Thinking about it, I used to think I was really good at avoiding conflict. Like I'd let little things slide just to keep the peace. But then I'd end up getting really upset over something small.
That's a classic example of how avoidance can backfire. It's really important to learn how to deal with conflict constructively.
So to talk about things openly and honestly.
Yeah. To express your needs and listen to your partners, to find solutions together.
Which I guess brings us to poor communication, right? Another big one.
Yeah. I mean, communication is the foundation of any relationship. And when it's not working, everything else suffers.
Okay, but I mean, communication seems kind of obvious, right? Like, of course you need to communicate. But what does poor communication actually look like?
It's not just about talking, it's about really listening.
So you're not just waiting for your turn to speak.
Right. Are you really hearing what your partner is saying? Are you trying to understand their perspective?
Are you interrupting them?
Making assumption.
All of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not even what you say, it's what you don't say.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Like if your partner asks what's wrong and you say nothing, but you're clearly upset.
Oh, yeah, I hate that.
Right. It's just going to create more frustration.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about talking, it's about like actually connecting.
Exactly.
Mm.
And speaking of connection, that brings us to neglect of emotional needs.
Okay, so what are emotional needs in a relationship?
Well, everyone has different needs, of course. But some common ones are feeling loved, feeling valued, feeling supported.
Yeah, I mean, those are pretty basic, right? You want to feel like your partner cares about you.
Exactly. But sometimes those needs get neglected, either because we're not communicating them clearly or because our partner isn't paying attention.
So, like, you might not even realize your needs aren't being met until it's too late. That happens a lot. And then people start to feel disconnected, resentful.
And they might start looking for those needs to be met elsewhere, right?
Exactly. Which brings us to lack of appreciation.
That's a big one, I think, because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to appreciate your partner.
Yeah, you get used to having them around and you start taking them for granted.
But I think everyone wants to feel appreciated, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be grand gestures. It's the little things. Saying thank you, giving a compliment.
Just acknowledging the things your partner does for you.
Right. It makes a big difference. It makes them feel seen and valued.
And, I mean, on the flip side, when you don't feel appreciated, it can really hurt.
It can, and it can make you more vulnerable to other problems.
Like,
Well, like infidelity, for example.
oh, right.
When someone feels unappreciated or neglected in their relationship, they might be more likely to seek validation elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a sensitive topic, of course. And it's not just about the act itself. It's about the betrayal, the broken trust.
Which can be really hard to repair.
It can. It takes a lot of work from both partners. And even then, there are no guarantees.
Okay, well, let's move on to something a little lighter. Inability to compromise.
All right.
Because relationships are all about give and take, right? You can't always get your way.
Exactly. It's not about winning every argument. It's about finding solutions that work for both people,
So even if it means meeting in the middle,
even if it means sacrificing something you want.
I think a lot of couples get stuck in that, like, me versus you mentality.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah.
But it creates a dynamic where one person always feels like they're losing.
Okay, so how do you avoid that?
Well, it starts with communication. Really listening to your partner's perspective and
Yeah.
being willing to let go of the need to be right all the time.
That's good advice. Okay, and the last one on the list is disrespecting boundaries. So why are boundaries so important in relationships?
Because boundaries define where you end and your partner begins. They protect your individual needs, your values, your space.
So, like, what are some examples of boundaries?
It could be anything, like needing time alone, feeling uncomfortable with certain types of physical touch, not wanting to share certain personal information.
So it's about respecting each other's individuality, even within the relationship.
Exactly. And when those boundaries are crossed, it can create a lot of problems. It can erode trust and lead to resentment.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone through all 12 behaviors. That's a lot.
It is. But I think the good news is just being aware of these behaviors is a huge step in the right direction.
Right, because once you know what to look for, you can start to change things.
Exactly. You can start to communicate better, to be more mindful of your partner's needs, to set healthy boundaries.
And hopefully avoid these relationship pitfalls.
Exactly.
Well, this has been really insightful. I mean, I know I've learned a lot,
Yeah.
and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
And, you know, what really stuck with me is how interconnected all of these behaviors are. Like, one can lead to another and then another.
Absolutely. It's a chain reaction.
So, you know, if you're criticizing your partner, it's likely to lead to defensiveness, which might then lead to stonewalling. And then before you know it, you're not even talking to each other anymore.
That's a great point. It's like a downward spiral.
It is. But the good news is, once you recognize the pattern, you can start to break the cycle.
Exactly. And start building a healthier, happier relationship.
So for all of you listening, I hope this has given you some food for thought. Think about your own relationships. Are there any of these behaviors that you recognize?
Are there any changes you want to make?
Because even small adjustments can make a big difference in the long run.
Absolutely.
All right, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.